Good evening. This is Edward McIntyre for a prophecy update for July 16th of 2023. Notice my new background that came in. I love it. I can put any kind of picture I want to back there. And also my new, if I can see here, point to it, spinning timepiece here, which is a reminder that we're running out of time. Let me just get right to it here. Um, right here. Go back up. One second. Okay. Luke 21:12. Before all these things, they will lay hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to be synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. But it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. Therefore, settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand what you will answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict nor resist. We're getting very close to that time, and persecution is coming. Weeks ago, I got to church and I decided to take one of my tracts here and to laminate it for some reason, and I laminated it and put it in my Bible, and then forgot all about it all these weeks. It's probably about a month and a half ago. Well, this past weekend, Dana and I went to Chattanooga and spent the night there. And the next morning, we went downstairs at the hotel dining area, and we went outside to eat breakfast. And we noticed a young man sitting at the very end, and he seemed kind of disheveled. And me and Dana talked about whether or not he was homeless or not. He kind of looked like he was, but we weren't sure. So, and whether or not we should give him something to eat. So we decided I went up and started talking to him and asked him if he was from Chattanooga. And he explained that he had only arrived there about less than a week before, and he didn't have a place to stay, and he was in dire need. But he was really a soft-spoken person. He didn't ask for anything, but when I asked him if he needed help, he said, "Yes, I'm in need." And so we brought him inside, and we brought him a breakfast, and then I thought, well, I sure wish I had some of my tracts on me. I didn't have them at the time, and then I remembered I brought my Bible down, and I had one tract that was laminated in the Bible. So I gave him a tract that was laminated, and then and asked him about reading it through, and then as he went outside, we knew that the weather was getting bad, and it was due to rain within the hour, and it was sprinkling a little bit at the time. And so the thought occurred to me, it's a good thing I gave him a laminated one instead of a regular paper one, because it might be destroyed in the rain. And then the thought occurred to me, God already knew that weeks ago. He knew that we would encounter that young man that morning, and that he would need a laminated tract. So God works that way. Dana taught at our church a couple weeks ago on a Wednesday night about what we would need to do to stand in these evil days, because unfortunately many people will fall. Many people will succumb to the persecution and all the things that are coming against us, and they'll fall. They'll fall away. The Bible tells us this will happen, and because there are trying times ahead. We will be tested. We will be persecuted, and now is not a time to let fear rule us, or deceive us, and be resolved in our faith to stand. When Simon Peter, when he sinned, Jesus told him that when you're converted, strengthen your brethren. And let me pull up a verse here. It says, strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. I believe that's part of my calling, is to strengthen people's faith and resolve in these last days. Let me get to some of the things that are going on. Let's see here. Let me get right up here. 1 second. Here it is. Okay. Prophecy update. Okay. In Michigan, I talked about this before, but they were working on a bill, a House Bill 4474, that might pass, and it was aimed at protecting people from hate speech. Well, it did pass in Michigan, and now it is a law that you can go to jail and pay a fine for hurting someone's feelings. Yes, that's right. So be careful what you say to others or what you do. Perhaps even pulling a Bible out could be considered hate speech, and or quoting a Bible verse or having a Bible verse on your shirt, or so be careful in Michigan. China is preparing for war against Taiwan. We knew this was coming, and they think from the preparations that they're doing that it could be within a few months. Now, the United States can't support Taiwan like we've been Ukraine. I don't know what's going to happen with that. In California, they were trying to pass a bill to increase child trafficking penalties. I think it was Senate Bill 14. But all of the Democrats blocked the bill, if that tells you anything. The movie Sound of Freedom is doing quite well. I encourage you to go see it. Now, Disney did everything they could to try to keep it from coming to the theaters. They held on to it for nearly 5 years, but it did come. That should tell you something about Disney. Let me go here a couple of notes I got on paper. Forgive me for looking down on some of them so I can get them right here. Recently, they've found out there are over 130 countries are aggressively going to a central bank digital currency. And I've talked quite a bit about that. And if it comes, and it will mean the end of our financial freedom. There's 11 countries that have already launched a central bank digital currency. Let's see, there's 2 big emerging economies, India and Brazil, that will launch it next year. The United States is moving forward as fast as they can, and before you know it, we're going to wake up one day and have a central bank digital currency ourselves. President Joe Biden is aggressively trying to get us into a central bank digital currency. The FedNow system is the first step. The UN is attempting to impose LGBT on all religions. It says here, according to a recent report they put out, religious freedom ends where LGBT rights begin. That's their conclusion. The report calls on governments to threaten and punish religious leaders and organizations that do not comply with LGBT orthodoxy. It says clergy and faith-based actors should be threatened to comply with official LGBT-friendly religious standards or face the consequences. That is what is coming to all of our churches very soon. And it goes on to say, when religions teach that homosexual conduct is a sin or that sex is an immutable biological reality, they run afoul of human rights laws. And that's our UN. The WHO, I mentioned before, already has aggressively trying to gain complete control of all the nations in the event of another pandemic or medical emergency that they deem as a medical emergency. And the United States has signed off on that. But even worse things are coming. Now the UN will vote next year on taking complete control of all nations in the event of an emergency that they deem as an emergency. And let me flip over to a video that John Haler just talked about that on his on the 16th report, and he tells it a little more in detail, and I'll let you hear it from him.
Cool. And the Federalist article is titled, "The UN is Planning to Seize Global Emergency Powers with Biden's Support." Now I was relying on that. That's right. I suppose I'll get blamed for that one too. The Federalist article. So there's a link in the show notes on the YouTube video and on the Rumble video description. But listen to this. In September 2024, less than 2 months before the next U.S. presidential election, the United Nations will host a landmark Summit of the Future, where member nations will adopt a pact for the future. The agreement will solidify numerous policy reforms offered by the UN over the past 2 years as a part of its sweeping Our Common Agenda. So this is a picture, this is a thing of the Common Agenda. You know, they talked about deadly pandemics, uninhabitable planet, destabilizing inequalities, warning signs, the cost of the digital economy if we don't do anything. It's $9.2 trillion, up to 827,000 viruses that could infect humans exist in mammals and birds. So listen, so if you're going to accuse me of alarmism and misery index, just wait around the UN documents and the climate change documents and the World Economic Forum documents for a while. One of the things back in March that this is also part of this common agenda, the renewed social contract, and how everything's going to be done by the public and everything's going to run through the UN and the World Health Organization. This is where they're really trying to seat power. And of course, the World Economic Forum is on board with it. Also in March, the UN came out with this thing called Strengthening the International Response to Complex Global Shocks, an emergency platform. Back to the Federalist article. Many of the details of the UN emergency platform were laid out in a March 2023 policy paper titled Strengthening the International Response to Complex Global Shocks. In that paper, UN Secretary General wrote this: "I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of a future complex global shock of sufficient scale, severity, and reach." Now, what does that mean? It's not really defined. And so you know what these people will do with it. They're going to use it to the maximum ability. We just went through this for the last 3 years. Once triggered, the emergency platform would give the UN the ability to actively promote and drive an international response that places the principles of equity and solidarity at the center of its work. The UN would bring together the stakeholders, that's a word they use all the time, the stakeholders, not shareholders. They're not shareholders in corporations, even though John Kerry acknowledged there are shareholders in corporations, that the managers of the corporation, the directors of the corporation, have a fiduciary obligation to do things like make money. Like, I mean, do you really think that John Kerry cares that his wife's company, Heinz, makes money or not? Of course they do. The emergency platform would give the UN the power to ensure that all participating actors make commitments that can contribute meaningfully to the response and that they are held to account for delivery on those commitments. But it gets worse. As difficult as it might be to believe, the story gets even worse from here. Even though the duration of the emergency platform would initially be set for a finite period, at the end of that period, the Secretary General could extend the work of an emergency platform, if required, according to their own policy proposal. And it appears that the Biden administration is fully on board. They've given speeches about how they're completely on board with these proposals. So we have a problem. Here's a little bit. This is some of the things that they think might be complex global shocks, major climatic event, future. It sounds like the news headlines from the last week, to be honest with you. Future pandemic risk, event involving biological agents, disruption to global flows or goods or people, unforeseen black swan event, cyberspace, global digital connectivity disruption. And listen, I think sometimes we get a little bit like they tell us that there's going to be cybersecurity events, and that means they're planning it. I don't know if maybe they're planning it, okay? But we know they're going to be cybersecurity events, and we would expect the balance sometimes as we expect people that are in charge of things to be planning for these eventualities. So if people do plan for that, you can't say that they're planning the event necessarily. Maybe they're just part of the government that plans to deal with it if it comes about. And maybe there are people, I'm sure there are nefarious people, that are planning these events, and there are people that are trying, there are state actors trying all the time. There's a constant hacking war going on between Iran and the U.S., Russia and the U.S., China and the U.S., and the U.S. has a big thing. But so they take these complex global shocks, and then you see that they tie them to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, all of these things, and they want to get everything accomplished by 2030. That seems to be the target date that they're pushing.
So you can see by the end of next year, I believe they're going to vote on this in September of next year, 2024. By the end of next year, we may have an event that happens that is either created by them or just a natural event they use to seize power. And once they get the power, they will not relinquish the power. So that is coming very quickly. In California, there was a mother with a special needs teenage daughter. It was in class, and she's really being bullied by not only the students but also the faculty and the whole school, even the principals, and threatened with expulsion. They've been calling her a bigot, a homophobe, intolerant, and different things for 3 reasons. Now you remember this is a special needs girl, and these are the reasons. One, she accidentally forgot to call someone by their correct pronoun. Number 2, the school was doing a class or a special lesson on lesbian sex, which included a lecture on scissoring. And her mother didn't want her to be a part of it and signed a paper to have her exempt, but the school didn't care about the mother's wishes and forced the child to go to the class anyway, and she didn't want to be in there. And lastly, she didn't want to get undressed in front of a male teacher. What happened is she was in the locker room to get changed, and one of the female coaches' door was open where she was at, and there was a male teacher in there, and he could clearly see her from where she was changing, and she didn't want to change in front of him. Therefore, the school is trying to expel her. And I brought that up because this is the kind of thing that our children all throughout the United States are up against today. In Utah, there's a school district, the Davis School District. It's a very large school district in northern Utah that has over 74,000 students. It has elementary, middle school, and high school schools in that area. Someone complained because they found a Bible, I think, in one of the elementary school libraries. And so the school boards met and decided to ban the Bible because of what they citing vulgarity and violence in the text. So they're banning the Bible in the elementary and the middle schools, but they will allow a few select Bibles in the high schools. Now, what gets me, I guess, is they let you see these people going to the school boards with books that have been recommended by the teachers out of the libraries, and they try to read them in front of the school boards, and the school boards stop them because they're so vulgar and so much sexual content that they can't be read at the school board, but yet they're recommending to the children. Let me go on to the next phase here. How to prepare. Um, my yard. I have spent hundreds of dollars on seed and on weed killer through the 10 years we've been here, trying to get a good lawn in the front. And regardless of what I do, there's still bare spots in different places. I've tried fertilizer. I've tried different things, and I could not. I still have bare spots. The other day, I was driving by. There's a vacant lot where Bobby Ledbetter's auto sales were, and I was driving by there, and there's several piles of gravel, just gravel. And I looked over and I noticed that they had grass growing on the gravel. And, it just shocked me. And I thought, here, I can't get my lawn to grow grass, and there's grass growing on just bare gravel. And I said to God, what's going on here? And as clear as a bell, God said, there's a problem with the soil. Um, Let me pull that up a minute here. And when God said that, I knew that He wasn't talking about my yard in particular, but He was talking about the church, His church. There's a problem with the soil. It reminds me of the story, the parable that Jesus gives in Matthew 13, Mark 4, and in Luke 8 of the sower that tries to sow the seed. And he talks about 4 different kinds of soil. Now, some people say, well, that deals primarily with new converts receiving the truth. Yes, it does, but it also is for all of us old timers and everybody in between. We all have to be careful what kind of soil we have if we're to produce fruit. I wanted to read one section here, and let me see, 4 or 5. Let me pull it up here. Now, there's 3 places it tells the parable, and then 3 places that it explains the parable. I'm going to read the explanation in Mark. That's in Mark 4, 13 through 20, or 14 through 20. It says here, in Mark 4:14, the sower sows the word, and these are the ones by the wayside where the word is sown. When they hear, Satan comes immediately and takes away the word that was sown in their hearts. These likewise are the ones sown on stony ground, who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with gladness. And they have no root in themselves, and so endure only for a time. Afterward, when tribulation or persecution arises for the word's sake, immediately they stumble. Now these are the ones sown among the thorns. They are the ones who hear the word, and the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, the desires of other things entering in choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. But these are the ones sown on good ground, those who hear the word, accept it, and bear fruit, some 30-fold, some 60-fold, some 100-fold. So you see, there's three kinds of soil that miss out. There's the wayside, there's the rocky ground, and those among thorns. I believe that those are indicative of today, the kind of people that will fall away in these last days. The wayside are the people uh, on the side, away from the Lord. They're too far away from Jesus. The rocky ground, they have no moisture, no root in themselves. And when persecution comes, they fall away. Those among thorns are those that are crowded out by the cares and desires of this life, and actually crowd out the Lord in our hearts. We have to be careful that we're not in any kind of these soils. We're not too far from the Lord, and it's easy to venture away from Him. That we're not rooted and grounded in Christ, so that when persecution and things come against us, that we're able to stand. And also, the rocky ground had no moisture. We need the moisture. We need the water from the Holy Spirit and from the Word to keep us moist and soft. And those among the thorns are people that we get caught up in this world so easily into the cares and the pleasures of this life, and we can let it can crowd out the Lord, and we can miss out. So those are the kind of things that we need to be careful about. The Bible tells us, let me look here in 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Here it goes. Examine yourself as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. We are to test ourselves and examine our hearts to see if we're still in the faith, and so we're not disqualified. There's a verse here, let me pull it up, that's kind of scary. And it's happened several times in the Bible, but one time in particular, when Samson sinned, the Bible tells us that Delilah said, "The Philistines are upon you." And so he awoke from his sleep and says, "I will go out as before, as other times, and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Now that's scary. There's other times in the Bible where we find that in Numbers 14 and 42, where God tells them to be careful about going out to war because the Lord wasn't among them, wasn't with them. So we need to be careful that we don't venture too far away, and that we allow the soil of our hearts to crowd out the Lord or let us depart from the Lord. We must search our priorities, our motives, our treasures, our securities, to make sure that we're firmly anchored in Christ in these last days. That's the only way we're going to be able to stand. Some people are like rose bushes. They look real pretty. People admire them from a distance, but you can't get too close because the thorns will get you. But we're not called to be rose bushes. We're called to be fruit trees. And there's a big difference. The fruit on the tree does two different things. The fruit feeds others and refreshes other people. And secondly, the fruit reproduces itself. If we're not doing those things, if we're not feeding others and making a difference in the lives around us wherever we go, and if we're not reproducing people into the kingdom of God, then we need to ask ourselves, are we producing fruit? Let me pull up another verse. John 15:4 says, "Abide in me, and I in you. The branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, bears much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing." We must abide in the Lord, and especially in these days that we're in. You know, I've seen many great street musicians. One in particular I remember. I was watching him. He was doing a card trick, and he asked somebody to pick a card, and he was shuffling them and doing all kind of things. And he was standing up against a glass at a restaurant, and there were people right on the other side of the glass watching it from the inside the restaurant. And so he mixes them up, and he does all these things, and then he takes the cards and he throws them right up against the glass. And all of them fall to the ground, but one card is facing out. It's her card. And she's amazed. Oh, yeah, that's my card. How come just my card stuck on the glass? But then she reaches to get it and she realizes that it's not on this side of the glass, the street side where he is at, but it's on the inside of the glass where the people in the restaurant are. And they have to reach up and get it. Now, how did that happen? I believe nowadays you have to be careful because I believe a lot of it is satanic. And so that's why I'm careful. I don't watch those things anymore. But it goes to show you there's more and more of those things happening where people are performing signs and wonders. The Bible tells us that in the last days, let me pull this up, verse right here. It says, "For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the very elect." What does that mean? We are going to see people that actually begin to perform miracles, what appears to be signs and wonders right before our eyes. But there's one thing I want you to remember, if you don't remember anything else, especially in these last days, because some of these people will be false prophets that do these great things. And this is what I want you to remember. Miracles and signs are not proof of genuine Christianity. Fruit is. And that's very important. Miracles and signs are not proof of genuine Christianity. Fruit is. The Bible tells us, let me pull this up here. "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? It is by their fruits that you'll know them." And now we just talked about the fruits. So that's how you will know them. Be careful in these last days. Do not be deceived. Lastly, I want to go over one thing, and I hope this encourages you. There's a story I read just recently of a young woman that was in her house. Her name was Tanya Tyler. She was in her house, folded her clothes, and she had her little toddler next to her in the either the bassinet or something and she's folded clothes, just thinking of other things. And as she does, she suddenly feels this overwhelming sense that there's danger, and she feels like God said, "Run." And she hesitates a second and, to think, well, why do I feel this? And then again, it hits her strongly. Run! So she grabs her child and she runs from the room. Just as she's exiting the living room, just as she gets out of the room, suddenly there's this loud, giant crash. And the debris and the dust hits them in the back as they go out. They're running out the living room, and she turns when she can, and she looks, and there's a gigantic tree laying where her and the baby had been. And I'm going to tell you that because John 10:27 says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." We have to be careful that we hear the voice of God and that we're listening. And the only way to do that is to stay close to the Lord in these last days. Let me show you a picture. Let me pull it up here. I got it at the top here. Here's a picture of the tree. As you can see, the tree didn't fall over. The top of the tree broke off and landed straight on to the house. And then, let's see, we pulled the other one up here. And here it is, her living room. Right there is where her and her baby had been. I tell you this to tell you that God still speaks to his people. God still cares about his people. God still wants to lead us and guide us wherever we go, but we need to do our part and listen. With that, I want to pray that God will be with you and encourage you to keep following him in these last days. And let's be strong and help others toughen up in these last days. Thank you and good night.